Kakalosh Boker or Masechet Zevachim Daf Yomi Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph 97A1. We're starting on the Mishnah on Tzadik Vav Amud Bet, where the Mishnah says as follows: Rabbi Tarfon Omer. Rabbi Tarfon comes and he says, Bishel. If right now a person comes and he's going to be mvashel the basar of the korbanot mitchilat haregel, from the beginning of the regel, so yivashel bo kol haregel. So you're allowed to come and to continue, right, being mevashel the entire chag without mirika and shtifa, and only the end of the chag will they come and they do it. Meaning, barega sheitchalta batchalat haregel, you start at the beginning of the regel, so you've got like a license, and the license is basically that you're allowed to come and you're allowed to continue until the end of the regel, okay, without any problem. V'chachamim omrim. Chachamim come and say, at zman achila, right? Until the time of the achila is the chiyuv of merika and shtifa. Okay, so the Gemara is going to explain what does that mean exactly. Merika, what is merika? Kemerikata kos, right? When you do merikata kos, right? Which again we're going to explain. This is how you're talking about when you're doing the kos of birkat hamazon, right? He says ushtifa is kishtifata kos. That's going to be like shtifata kos. Okay, so he says merika ushtifa is going to be betzonen, is going to be with maim sonenim. Okay, a shipud vaskala, but the shipud and askala are going to be done with chamin, right? It's going to be done with hagala of chamin. Says the Gemara. My tamad Rabbi Tarfon. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Tarfon? We're on the top of Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph. My tamad Rabbi Tarfon. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Tarfon? Right, that you don't have to do Merika Shtifa the entire time of the Chag. He says, Damar Krab, as the pasuk says, yeah, ufanita vaboker valachta leolecha, which means it's mashma that you're going to go the next morning, right? When be'etzem the kavana is to the day after the Chag, right? So akatuva sa'o lekulan boker echad. So he comes and he says like this. He says, right, the pasuk comes and he made all the days of the Chag like one day. So therefore, since it's all one day, so therefore that's why he's saying that you don't have to do the Merikah Shtifa until the end of the day, right? So therefore the entire Chag is one day. So if the entire Chag is one day, it's one day. So matkif la Ravach Davoy Bar Ami. So ask Ravach Davoy Bar Ami, v'chi em pigul baregel. He says what? If you come and you are going to do shechita on a chatat, on one of the days of the regel, now you had in mind that you're going to do it the next day, but it's still the regel. So what? There's no pigul? Because ki'ilu, everything's one day, or there's no notar, there's no leftovers because everything is ki'ilu one day. And now v'chitem, and now you're going to tell me achanami that yes, in achanami, there's no pigul and no notar. He says, "Vatanya, we learned in a writer, Rabbi Natan Omer, lo amar Rabbi Tarfon ela zo bilvad." This only refers to the halachot of Merika Shtifa, but not to do with any other halachot. Meaning, we're not talking about other halachot. It's only Merika Shtifa. So he says, but rather ela ked Rav Nachman amar Rabba Bravua. But he says it's rather like Rav Nachman named Rabba Bravua. The amar Rav Nachman amar Bravua, kol yom vayom nasa giul lachavero. Every single day, it's like a hagala to the previous day, right? So therefore, that's why it's never going to become notar. And therefore, the kli does not need merikah shtifa because every single day, right, it's going to be, here he says, since they bring so many shlamim, right? So he comes and he says, so because of that, in the Mikdash, it was like, imagine, Chag. Chag, you've got thousands of people coming and bringing korbanot, and they're doing all these things. So therefore, because of that, he says the tam, which is nivlad, will never become notar, because that's why you don't need to do mirikah shtifa, because every single time it's going to continue going. Okay? Chachamim come and they argue, and they say that's not true, right? We don't say that, but rather it's until zman achila. What does that mean now? Until zman achila. So he says, "My kamar." What does that mean now? So Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Hua says, "Rav Nachman Nimar Rav Hua mamtin la ad zman achila." You're going to wait until the end of the zman achila, vehada ravila, and then you're going to do merika ushtifa. Okay, which is basically going to be immediately right after you finish the eating. Okay, so he says, right? How do we know these words? Sam Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yosef ben Abba says Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yosef ben Abba. Ketiv, it says umorak v'shutaf. Uchtiv, and it's written kol zechar b'kohanim yochal. Right? What does that mean? All the zechar and the kohanim you're going to eat it. Haketzad. So he says mamtin la zman achila. You're going to wait until the end of the time of the achila of the korban. V'had ravila merika shtifa. And afterwards you're going to do the merika and the shtifa. What is merika? Kimirikata kos. What is shtifa? Kishtifata kos. So he says like this. He says, right, as follows. Taran Rabbanan. Mirika shtifa is going to be betzonen. These are the words of Rabbi. Chachamim omrim. Mirika is going to be bechamim. Ushtifa is going to be betzonen. Okay. Now, if you realized when we're talking about now the kos of the Birkat Hamazon, there it said hadacha and shtifa. right? He says hadacha is on the inside and shtifa is on the outside, right? So he comes and he says, right? He says merika is a shifshuf of the kli, right? With the water in order to get rid of all the leftovers of the food. Okay, that's called the merika. And the shtifa is just a rinse. So therefore, that's what's going to be the difference between merika and shtifa, even though some people say that it's inside and outside. Okay, so now he says like this. He says, "My tamad rabbanan." What's the reasoning of the rabbis that they come and they say that it's going to be bechamin? That merika has to be with maim chamin, and then shtifa is going to be bitzonen. So he says, "Mididhava giulev the kochavim," just like hagalav of the kochavim. When you do hagalav of the kochavim, what do? You first do hagala, and after you do hagala, what are you going to do? Then you're going to do after hagala shtifa. What is going to be the shtifa? The shtifa is going to be after you already just did the hagala, which is basically now you're going to do shtifa. What is shtifa? Shtifa is the rinsing with cold water, and that's what we spoke about all the time. You first do hagala with hot water, and then you do shtifa with the cold water. The Rebbe Amalecha, and Rebbe is going to tell you, Hagala lo kamina. I'm not talking about Hagala now. Ki kamina, what are we talking about? Lemerika shtifa de batar Hagala. We're talking about the Merika shtifa after the Hagala. Meaning, even after the Hagala, there's still going to be an inyan of Maim Tzoranim or Maim Chamim, according to who? Of Merika shtifa. For Rabbanan, but according to the rabbis, in Ken, if so, Lichtov Kar, the Pasuk should have says, O morak umorak, or shataf shataf. What is umorak vishtaf? Why do we have to do two different things? Merika and shtifa. If it's all going to be the same, so it should have said murak murak or shutaf shutaf. But it doesn't say that. It says murak veshutaf. Shmamina comes to teach you that the pasuk is being mitkaven to two different things. Number one is merika is maim chamin, and then shtifa is going to be maim tzoranim with cold water. The Rebbe, and according to Rebbe, so he says if it was written murak murak kavamina trezim murak, I would have just thought to say that you have to do it two times beoto makom with maim tzoranim, or trezim shutaf, or two times beoto makom with shtifa. Therefore, it says murak v'shutav. L'malecha merika is like a merikata kos, which is on the inside of the cup, and the shtifa is shtifata kos, which is going to be on the outside of the cup. So that's why I told you like shtifa v'dacha. One is on the inside, and one is going to be on the outside. Okay, fine. Mishnah in the middle of the page. Okay, Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph. Bishel bo kodshim v'chulin or kodshe kodashim v'kodashim kalim. What happens if you cooked kodashim and chulin in the same pot, or kodshe kodashim kalim? Im yesh b'hem menoten ta'am, if it's got taste, harei kalin ne'chalin kachamurin sheben. So then you have to eat the kalin like the chamurin, meaning chulin you could have eaten whenever, however, whatever. That's chulin. So that's a kal. So you have to eat that like the chamur. Right, so that means if the chamur you had to eat it within yom v'layla or whatever it is, so it takes on the chumrot. And the same thing with all these halachot, meaning that you're always going to do the kalim have to be done like the chamurin. Okay, ve'enan tunim merika shtifa. You don't need merika shtifa. Ve'enan poslim b'maga. Right, if it's going to touch, so it's not going to be posel b'maga. Rakik. When you have a rakik, which is like a type of like a cracker, right? Shenagab rakik, the touches another rakik, right? Another rakik, and therefore it was bala, the kasher from the pasul. V'chaticha b'chaticha, or from a chaticha which is pasul of kodshim, touches a kosher one. Lo kol harakim v'lo kol chatichot asul. Not everything is going to be asul. Only asul b'makom shebala. Only in the place where it's going to be bolea. Only in that place where it's touching, not everything else. Which means this: I've got a whole bunch of pieces of meat. I threw one piece of meat, and one piece of meat was not kosher. It's not that all of them become non kosher. Only the place which was bala, only that place where it touched. So says the Gemara, my kamar, what are you talking about now? So says the Gemara, haki kamar. This is what it means to say. Im yesh b'hem menoten ta'am, if it's got taste, harei akalin ne'chalin kachamurin utudim merika shtifa v'poslim b'maga. Right? And b'hem menoten ta'am, if it does not have any taste, and akalin ne'chalin kachamurim. So then the kalin are not going to be like the chamurim, right? And he says, ואין הנתונים מדיקה ושטיפה, ואין פוסלים במגע, and it's not going to be פסול במגע. So he says, נהי דקודשי קודשים לא באי, קודשים קלים מבאי. He says, however, even if you're going to tell me now, מדיקה ושטיפה does not need, at the end, the entire concept of the, to be מבטל אותם, he says, the מדיקה ושטיפה, he says, קודשים קלים should. So Abai says, what does it mean, en teunin? En teunin the kamar, we're talking about kodesh kodeshim. But kodeshim kalim, they do need at the end of zman achilatam, they do need, right, the medika ushtipa. Rava is going to answer, Hamani, who's this? Rabbi Shimoni. It's Rabbi Shimon. The Amar that he says, kodeshim kalim en teunin medika ushtifa. Kodeshim kalim never need medika ushtifa, and therefore here the same thing, we don't need medika ushtifa. So Bishlam al Rava, I understand according to the Rava, Hainu Dichtani, that's why we learned Kodesh Kadashim Kadashim Kalim to do with Kodesh Kadashim and Kadashim Kalim together. Right? Why? Because according to him, he's saying that it's coming to teach you that even Kadashim Kalim do not mean the Medikav Shtifa. But according to Abaye, Why do I need two cases? Why do I need the case of kalim v'chamurim? One of them was chulim with kodshim, and one of them was kodshe kadashim with kodshim kalim. If kodshe kalim is the same as kodshe kadashim, so why do I need two different cases? Why do I need? It's the exact same thing. So he says tzricha, you need it. Why? Itan akodshim v'chulim. If I only taught you something holy and chulim, hava mina, I would have thought to say, right? Chulin hu mevatel kodshim. That only chulin is mevatel kodshim. Tilav minayhu, because it's not the same thing. Aval kadashei kadashim v'kadashim kalim. But when you have kadashei kadashim kadashim kalim, emalo, I would say no. Why? Because both of them are holy. Meaning, if you have something completely mundane and something holy, you can't compare. So bichlal, it doesn't even speak. But when you have two things which are holy, just one is kadashim kalim, one is kadashim kadashei kadashim, I would have started saying something now. So yes, because they're both holy. Exactly. They're both on a higher level. So he says, V'itana kodshe kadashim. And if we only talk kodshe kadashim, kadashim kalim, hava, I mean, I would have thought to say kadashim hu, ta'lima levetuli kodshim. That only kadashim are going to be mevatel other kodashim. Aval chulin, but to do with chulin, emalo, I would say no. Right? So therefore he says, that's why he says sricha, that's why, and he said that there's no difference between them. Everything has to do with noten tam. And as long as it's going to be noten tam, it's going to be mevatel. Remember, as long as it gives a taste, the taste is everything that we care about. Okay? Fine, two dots. Rakik shenaga berakik. When you have one rakik that comes and touches another rakik. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita. Kola sheniga, anything that's going to touch it. So he says now, right, like this. So he says, right, kola right, yachol, I would have thought to say afilu shelo bala, even if it wasn't absorbing anything. Talmud Lomar bivsara. So it comes to what does it mean bivsara? Right? Sadik zayin mubet. It means ad shi bala bivsara, 97b. It means until you're going to come and it's going to be absorbed in the meat. Yeah, so he says, Yachol, I would have thought to say, Naga v'mitzat chaticha yekuv lo pasul. That if it's going to touch part of the chaticha, the entire thing is going to be pasul. Talmud Lomar yiga. What does that mean? Hanogea pasul. If it touches, it's going to be pasul. Haketza, what's the case? Chotech et hamakom shebala. You're going to cut the place where it was bala. Bivsara v'lo begidim v'lo b'atzamot v'lo karnaim v'lo b'telefayim. He says bivsara means not in the gidin or the atzamot, or not in the karnaim, or not in the telefayim. What is yigdash? It says liot kamoa. Haketza, what's the case? Im pesula היא תיפסל, ואם כשרה היא תאכל כחמור שבה. He said תאכל כמו חמור שבה. What does that mean? He comes and he says this. If it's going to be pasul, so for example the chatat is going to be pasul, so it's going to be posel the other one with bliata, with the absorption, right? Why? Because once it touches it, now you're not allowed to eat it. So therefore it's going to touch. If it's already going to be a pasul piece of meat or whatever that touches another piece, and now it's going to make it pasul, so now you cannot eat it. But if it's going to be kosher, so he says, so now you always have to eat it with the more stricter of the two. Okay, whatever it was. Let's say Kodesh Kadashim or Kadashim Kalim, you're always going to eat it with the stricter of the two. So says the Gemara, Amai, why? You have a positive commandment, and the positive commandment should push off the negative commandment. Meaning, you have the mitzvah to say of eating kodshim, and that should push off the negative commandment of not eating something pasul, right? The love of achila kodshim pesulim. So therefore, you've got a positive. Many times we see that a positive pushes off a negative, right?
So an example, he said that if you have a baguette, which is a mixture,
Wool and linen. Shatnez.
Shatnez, that has four corners, he needs to have tzitzit.
Because the mitzvah taseh pushes off the lo taseh for sure. And the clothing of the kohanim, right? Many clothing of the kohanim had shatnez. Yeah, because again, whenever you're doing a mitzvah, meaning the positive commandment will always push off a negative commandment. No, not there's special halachot. Because again, one more time, the positive always pushes off the negative. There's always a positive commandment that will come and push off a negative commandment. Yeah. So he says like this. So he says, why don't we have a mitzvah taseh push off a negative commandment, right? So he says, Amar Rava says, En aseh doche lo taseh shebamikdash. There's a new rule. Even though usually you're right, there's a positive commandment pushes off a negative commandment. The common scenarios, by the way, of a positive commandment pushing off a negative commandment is by Hashavat Avedah, where it says Vitalamta, where it says that you're not allowed to close your eyes from a returning lost object, but if it's a zaken or somebody that's a tamil chacham, he doesn't have to return it. So therefore, the positive commandment pushes off the negative commandment. That's exactly. So that's the usual case where they usually bring down like the example where you see a positive commandment pushing off a negative commandment. But he says, but en ani en aseh doche lo ta'aseh shebamikdash. He comes and he says like this. He says a positive commandment is not going to push off a negative commandment in the Bet HaMikdash. Meaning, even though we just gave you a general rule that a positive commandment comes and pushes off a negative commandment, here, right, we don't say that a positive commandment is going to push off a negative commandment because it's in the Bet HaMikdash. So when it's in the Bet HaMikdash, we don't say this principle. Shneimar b'zeh pasuk ve'etzem lo tishbiru bo. You're not allowed to come and break the bones of the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Shimon ben Asiya omer, etzem sheyesh bo moach. What happens if it's got like marrow inside of the bone? Ve'echad etzem shem moach, or if it doesn't have. Amaya said, he says, why? Why are you going to tell me now that it's a suit to break it? Net yaseh v'lidchei lo taseh. You have the mitzvah to say of eating the Korban Pesach, and that should push off the negative commandment of breaking the bones of the Korban Pesach. Now, again, there it's brought down in the Chinuch. The reason why we don't want to break bones is because we're supposed to show hierarchy, and people that are rich are not going to come and start breaking bones and eating the marrow. You understand? But right, the concept was if you have a positive commandment should push off the negative commandment. So answers the Gemara, but you see from here, that in the Bet HaMikdash, we don't use this general rule. Meaning this general rule that a positive commandment can push off a negative commandment, we don't say this in the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, that is the answer of Rava. Rav Ashi comes and he's going to answer something else, and he says, Rav Ashi Amad Yigdash. What does it mean, Yigdash? Asehu. When it says over there the word Yigdash, Yigdash is already a positive commandment. Ve'en aseh dochet lo ta'aseh ve'aseh, which means like this. Not only is there a negative commandment to eat kadashim psulim, there's also a positive commandment that you're not supposed to eat kadashim psulim. So since it's a positive and a negative, a positive commandment can only push off a negative by itself. But when you have a positive, you cannot push off a positive and a negative. Right? That doesn't work. Meaning like this. You've got a mitzvah aseh and lo taseh, the positive and the negative. Remember, it's not really negative. I once said it and somebody goes to me, Rabbi, what does it mean a negative commandment? It's not really a negative commandment. Negative sounds like bad. It's not that it's not to do. You're right. You're right. So it's not a negative. We just it's a loose translation.
Biology, when you have a blood test, you said it's negative. Good, you have nothing.
Right, exactly. It's not that it's a negative. It's just that there's nothing meaning like this. So you've got the positive commandment and you have a negative commandment, right? The positive commandment pushes off the negative, but he says it can only push it off when it's by itself. So you have the positive, negative, it pushes it off by itself. He says, but if you've got a positive plus a negative in this, right? So here you have the word yigdash, right? Yigdash is positive, right? And you have the negative commandment that you're not allowed to eat kodshim, which are pasul. So you have a positive and a negative in the kodshim, which becomes pasul. So the mitzvat aseh of eating kodshim cannot push off a positive and a negative because it could only push off a negative, but now it's a positive and a negative. Once it's positive and negative, it cannot do that. Yeah.
Positive push negative.
A positive could push negative, but a positive cannot push off positive and negative. Ashkechan chatat de mekadeshet, right? Bebalua. We found now a case where you have a mekor from the Torah that a chatat is going to be mekadeshet the chaticha, right, which touches it and it gets absorbed from it. Because the pasuk is talking about an achatat. Shar kodashim minaran. How do I know that the same halacha applies to other kodashim as well? So Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Lazar says Shmuel in the name of Rabbi Lazar. Zot Torah la'ola lamincha v'lachata v'la'asham v'lamiluim u'zevach hashelamim. What does that mean? The pasuk is making a kesh. It's makish all these korbanot together. So you have the ola, mincha, chatat, asham, miluim, zevach hashelamim, everything. Everything is the same. What does that mean? We're making a kesh between other kodashim and chatat that just like they're going to become kadosh bibliya, so to the same halacha would apply over here. La ola is like ki ola. Just like the ola needs a kli when you bring it, so too it's going to need a kli when you bring it. What do you mean kli now? My kli. So ilem mizrak. If you're going to tell me it's the fork, right? This is the mizrak which is going to be used. He says b'shalmei tzibur nami ktubu. It's also written by the shalmei tzibur. Vayikach Moshe chetzi adam vayasem ba'aganot. You're going to come. You're going to take chetzi adam and you're going to place it in the aganot, right? Which is going to be in the. It says over here also the shlamim is going to be placed here, which means that you also need a kli. So he comes and he says, Ela, but rather the sakin. We're talking about that you need the sakin of the shchita, meaning the only knife that you should use for shchita is with kli sharet, not with a stone or not with a kaneh or not with anything else. right? Ve'ola gufa minalan. So therefore, how do we know that for everything else? Which means like this: we just learned, like the ola needs to be cut, needs to be used a kli sharet to do the shechita. Meaning, I can't just come and bring my own butcher knife from home and do shechita with my own butcher knife. It has to be a kli sharet. Kli sharet, that it belongs to the Bet HaMikdash, and it's a kli sharet. It's a holy utensil. So you sharpen it. Yeah. So he says, right? He says, now when you're going to come and you're going to use this sakin, it's not only on the guf on the ola, it's on everything else. So ask the Gemara, ve'ola gufa minalan. How do I know, right? The ola itself that you also have to do that. Tichtiv, it says in pasuk, vayishlach Avraham et yodo vayikach et ma'achelet. Right? He says he took the ma'achelet. Now that ma'achelet was for an ola, because Yitzchak Avinu was going to become a korban ola. Avraham was not going to eat Yitzchak. So since he wasn't going to eat Yitzchak, so that was a korban olah, right? We call him an olah tamima, right? That's what we call him. That's Avraham Yitzchak. So he said, "Dichtiv," as it says in pasuk, "Vayaleu leolah tachabeno." He put it as an olah instead of a son, meaning the son was supposed to be a korban olah, but now that he didn't bring his son and he was going to bring this, the deer, right? They brought the, what's it called, the tzvi, yeah. Not the tzvi. Yeah, ayal. Do you call it the ram? The ram. Yeah. He come and he says, right? He says, right, the ram. So he come and right. So he come and he says like this. He says you're going to bring it instead of the son. So therefore, once he's going to bring it, he's going to bring it as an olah. Now he says, okay, fine. What about the mincha? So he says, ma mincha en nechel el zichei chuna. We're going to make a kesh that just like the mincha, which is the flour offering, is only eaten by the zichrei cheuna. What is zichrei cheuna? The males. You need a male to tell you that. Yeah, so he says zichrei cheuna. Right? What does it mean zichrei cheuna? Zecharim. Yeah. He comes and he says zichrei cheuna. Maihi. So he comes, he says, what does that mean now? Maihi, he says, I chatat v'asham. If it's talking about now the chatat and asham, he says, behed yaktiv. He says, it's written mefurash, kol zachar b'kohanim ochlenu. Yeah, he says, behed yaktiv behu. He says, behed yaktiv behu, right? He says, "Kol zachar b'kohanim." It's true. 100. He says like this. He says, "Maihi." What does it mean now over here? He comes and he says like this. He says, if it's going to be the chatat and asham, behed yaktiv behu. It's written mefurash, kol zachar b'kohanim yochalenu. He says all the zachar and the kohanim, they're going to eat it. But if it's going to be on shalmet tzibur, miribuya dekra'ati. He comes and he says this is going to be from the extra of the pasuk, because it says bekodesh hakodeshim tuchalenu, kol zachar yochalato. Any male is going to eat it. Limed al shalmet tzibur. So this is going to be teach on the shalmet tzibur she'ena nechalim, that it's only going to be eaten ela lezichrei cheuna, only for zichrei cheuna. So the Gemara answers tonight. You're right. It's a machloket tanaim to do with shalmet tzibur. Are they going to be eaten only by the zichrei cheuna or not? Some people they come and they learn it from Bekodesh Kodoshim Tuchalenu, and other people, which is going to be Rabbi Eliezer, he argues and he's learning it that you learn it from the Zota Torah. So there's two different places where to learn it from, but that's where we're going to be learning, right? This halacha.